After years of living under the iron grip of our HOA, they finally went too far, slapping me with a steep fee just because I had what they called too many vehicles parked in my own driveway. What they didn't realize was that I'd been quietly playing the long game, secretly acquiring properties throughout the neighborhood for years. And now it was finally time to show Karen, our power-obsessed HOA president, who truly held the reins in this community. But the real question was, would she accept the truth when it hit her, or crumble under the weight of her own arrogance? Hey there, welcome to my channel. If HOA drama and power plays are your thing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more wild Karen stories. I never set out to start a war with the HOA. Truly, I didn't. But when I opened my front door last Tuesday morning and saw that glaring orange violation notice taped to the glass, I knew it was on. My hands trembled as I read the bolded text. Immediate fee adjustment, $500 per month for property violation. Excessive vehicles. The reason? 3 cars. That's it. My construction truck, which I use for work, Sarah's SUV for her night shifts at the hospital, and the used Honda we just gifted our daughter for her 16th birthday. 3 completely reasonable vehicles parked in our own space. From my kitchen window, I watched Karen Mitchell making her morning inspection rounds, armed with her signature pink clipboard and tape measure. She stopped at our driveway, pulled out her phone, and click, snapped yet another round of photos. It was the 3rd time this week. "She's out there again," Sarah called from the living room, her voice tight with frustration. "Maybe we should just put the Honda in the garage?" "No," I replied firmly, setting my coffee on the counter. "We're not going to act like we've done something wrong. That garage is packed with your medical supplies and my job tools, just like we explained at the last HOA meeting." That meeting, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. Karen hadn't even looked up from her phone when I tried to explain our situation. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson," she'd said with that smug tone. "If you can't afford proper garage space, perhaps this isn't the right community for you." What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that for the last 5 years, I'd been quietly acquiring homes in our development through my real estate investment firm. Each time a house went on the market, I purchased it under a different LLC. It started as a business move, but eventually it turned into something personal. I stepped outside to grab the mail, deliberately moving slowly. Karen, pretending to admire Mrs. Johnson's rose bushes, kept one eye fixed on me. Poor Mrs. Johnson. Last month she was fined because her flowers were apparently too bright and disrupting the visual uniformity of the block. Just then my phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer lit up the screen. "All papers signed. You now officially own 67% of the neighborhood." I couldn't help but grin as I slid the phone back into my pocket, just in time for Karen to strut over, gripping her clipboard like it was a royal decree. "Mr. Thompson," she cooed, sugar-coated poison in her tone. "I assume you saw the vehicle violation notice?" "I did, Karen," I answered coolly, "and I have a few legal questions about that rather sudden fee hike." With a flick of her hand, she brushed me off. "The board has the complete authority to impose new fees whenever necessary. Maybe if you showed up to more meetings, you'd have a better grasp of how things operate," she said, her smile tight and performative, devoid of any real warmth. What she didn't realize was that I'd been attending every HOA meeting for half a decade, just not in person. My proxies, disguised as individual homeowners, had shown up faithfully, recording every moment, every shady rule enforcement, every unjustified fee Karen had pushed through. I had a file thicker than a phone book. As she turned and strutted away, heels clacking against the concrete, she threw a parting shot over her shoulder. "Oh, and just so you're aware, the board is holding an emergency meeting tonight, 7 sharp. We'll be discussing new actions for problematic properties." I watched her disappear down the block, then pulled out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen as I sent a message to my attorney. "Get the paperwork ready. Looks like Karen's making her move tonight." Right on cue, my daughter's car pulled into the driveway, and there was Karen again, stopping to take yet another round of photos like a paparazzo on a mission. My jaw clenched, but I kept my composure. Tonight, the rules of the game would change forever. First, I had calls to make. Back inside, I unfurled a stack of property blueprints across my desk, every lot marked and color-coded with meticulous care. 5 years of planning, 5 years of gathering proof, studying patterns, and watching Karen turn our HOA into her personal dictatorship. She had made one crucial error, thinking I was just another resident. She had no clue who she was up against. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Johnson from across the street. Her voice trembled with frustration as she described yet another violation letter stuffed in her mailbox. As I listened, my eyes drifted to the framed photo of my father on the wall, standing proudly outside the first home he ever owned. The same home he'd been forced to sell at a loss 2 decades ago after an HOA drove him out. He'd always told me, "Don't fight mad, fight smart." I checked my watch. 6 hours left. Karen wanted to play power games over a few vehicles? She had no idea the storm heading her way. Later that evening, I entered the community center's meeting room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Every seat was taken, neighbors packed in shoulder to shoulder, murmuring quietly. Karen had gone all in this time. She even hired a professional photographer to dramatize my driveway, turning 3 ordinary cars into a full-blown street crime scene. "Let's begin," Karen said grandly, tapping her sparkly pink gavel against the podium. She timed this emergency perfectly, midweek in the evening when most working families couldn't make it. But I was there, quietly seated in the last row, watching her perform for her audience. "If you'll look at these professionally documented images," she started, flipping through a dramatic slideshow, "you'll notice that Mr. Thompson's residence now resembles a used car dealership." Gasps echoed from her usual clique in the front row, the same of folks who left their holiday lights up until spring without receiving so much as a warning. I scanned the room quietly, noting familiar faces and their reactions. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, rolled her eyes in full view. She'd been fined just weeks ago for having her grandson's car in her driveway while he was up on the roof fixing a leak. Then there was Mr. Chen, the high school science teacher, scribbling furiously in a notepad. He'd been cited for parking a few inches over the line during the last snowstorm. The ridiculousness wasn't lost on anyone, except Karen. Click. Karen advanced to the next slide, an awkwardly zoomed-in image of my daughter's parked car. "This vehicle has remained unmoved for more than 48 hours, she declared. What she conveniently didn't say? My daughter had just come home from college for a quiet weekend. Karen kept the presentation going, parading out charts that supposedly showed declining property values, anonymous complaints, undoubtedly from her inner circle, and even local weather data she claimed proved my vehicles were somehow causing excessive snow buildup. It was laughable, except no one was laughing. She then reached for a massive binder and flipped it open with a dramatic flair. "I've also recorded every single vehicle entering and leaving Mr. Thompson's property over the last 3 months," she said. My eyebrows lifted. She had been tracking our movements. Around the room, neighbors squirmed in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with how far she'd gone. That's when Sarah Jenkins, my neighbor next door, stood up. "Karen, don't you think this is a bit much? It's just a few cars in a normal driveway," she said, her tone calm but firm. Karen's face flushed as she barked back, "You're out of order! You haven't been recognized by the chair." And then her husband Bob emerged from the corner, quietly handing out printed copies of a proposed amendment, one that would cap each household at 2 cars and mandate that all vehicles be kept inside garages. The absurdity was almost too much. Almost. Karen, undeterred, pushed forward. "We'll now proceed with a vote on the new vehicle policy and associated penalties," she announced, ignoring the lack of discussion. That was my signal. I stood up slowly and straightened my tie. "Point of order, Madam President," I said clearly. Karen peered over her glasses, eyes narrowed. "You're not recognized, Mr. Thompson." "Actually," I replied calmly, opening a folder I'd brought, "as per HOA bylaw section 7.3, any homeowner may raise a point of order concerning voting procedures." The room instantly went quiet. I noticed Karen's grip tighten on the podium, her perfectly polished nails turning white. "Before any vote is taken," I continued, walking slowly toward the front, the sound of my steps echoing across the linoleum floor, "I think it's only fair to take a closer look at who really owns what in this community." I paused, then held up a large document. "You see, over the last 5 years, Sunrise Properties has been steadily acquiring homes in this neighborhood." Karen's expression began to shift, her usual smug confidence fading into pale disbelief, as I unfolded a large map of the neighborhood and pinned it to the board. "As the CEO of Sunrise Properties," I began, "I thought the board and our neighbors might be interested in knowing exactly who holds the majority ownership within this HOA. I paused deliberately, locking eyes with each board member seated in front of me. "But maybe we can table that discussion until we address the disturbing level of surveillance that's been taking place under Karen's leadership." A wave of gasps and whispers spread through the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed phones being raised, neighbors recording what was quickly turning into the meeting of the decade. Karen reached for her water bottle with a shaky hand, accidentally tipping over her glittery pink gavel as she did. It clattered loudly against the podium. Then Bob, her ever-silent husband, rushed up beside her, whispering frantically in her ear. Karen's eyes widened as the truth finally dawned on her. She hadn't been policing just another resident all these years. She'd been picking a fight with the one man quietly buying her entire kingdom out from under her. The room went quiet again as I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but my tone calm and deliberate. Karen's tight-lipped smirk was gone, replaced by a tense silence. I set my leather briefcase on the table and slowly clicked it open. Before anyone votes on these absurd new fees, I said, I have something to show you. One by one, I pulled out deed after deed, each document representing another property I had quietly purchased through different LLCs. I laid them out carefully, lining them across the table for everyone to see. The murmurs returned, louder this time. Shock turned into curiosity, then outrage as I began to speak. For 5 years now, I've watched this board neglect real issues, ignored potholes, crumbling fences, broken streetlights, while coming down hard on homeowners over potted plants and parking spaces. I've watched Karen fine Mrs. Johnson, who is 82 by the way, for having a flower pot that was an inch too tall. Meanwhile, her friend Susan built a neon purple fence and somehow escaped without a single warning. Karen flushed crimson. That's a lie. I apply the rules equally to everyone, she blurted, gripping her water bottle with trembling hands. But as she took a sip, her shaky fingers betrayed her, spilling water all over her expensive blouse. I tapped the projector remote and brought up footage on the screen behind me. Here's Karen at 3:00 a.m. last Tuesday, measuring my front lawn with a ruler. The video played clearly, the night vision footage catching every detail. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I clicked again, and here she is completely ignoring the Thompsons' property violations, right after they hired her son's landscaping business. Heads turned, several people began whispering and nodding, recalling their own experiences with Karen's blatant favoritism. But perhaps the most important thing I've uncovered, I said, holding up the final deed in my hand, is this. Through Sunrise Properties, I now legally own 67% of the homes in this development. I let the words linger in the air, which means by law, I now hold the majority interest in this HOA. Karen shot out of her chair, sending it skidding behind her. You can't do that. It's not allowed, she shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch that barely sounded human. I returned her panic with a calm, confident smile. Actually, I can, I said evenly. 3 separate law firms have reviewed every document. It's all 100% legal. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a second folder. And here, I added, placing it on the table, are signed statements from 32 homeowners, reports of harassment, inconsistent rule enforcement, and suspicious financial activity. That was the spark. The room burst into a frenzy of voices. Mrs. Johnson stood up, her voice trembling but fierce. Last winter, they fined me $200 for not clearing my walkway fast enough, and I was in the hospital with pneumonia. Her words hit like a hammer. One by one, others began speaking out. Personal stories poured into the room, each one a new crack in Karen's facade. She pounded her gavel, desperate to regain control, but the noise swallowed her authority. No one was listening anymore. I moved to dissolve the current board, I announced clearly. It's time for new elections with term limits, transparency, and real accountability. No more midnight lawn patrols, no more favoritism. Bob Chen raised his hand from 2 rows back. I second the motion, he said. Hands shot up across the room, the tide had turned. Karen, now red-faced and visibly shaken, grabbed her designer purse and stormed toward the exit. This meeting is adjourned, she barked. Actually, I said, voice still even, according to Section 7.3 of our bylaws, you need a majority vote to adjourn, and I don't believe you have that anymore. I motioned toward the table lined with property deeds. We're just getting started. She stopped cold, hand frozen on the doorknob. Her iron grip on the neighborhood had just melted away. 2 decades of unchecked power were unraveling before her eyes. Now then, I continued, pulling out yet another folder. Let's have a conversation about last summer's pool renovation budget, the one that cost $50,000 and somehow didn't fix the pool. I brought along some bank records that might interest everyone. Karen stumbled back and leaned against the wall, her face drained of color. She didn't notice the news van pulling up outside. I had invited the press to witness what I called a community reorganization meeting. The next few hours would reshape everything. But before that, we had years of secrets to unearth. and I had the documentation to expose it all. That Monday morning, I walked into my lawyer's office and found 20 furious voicemails from Karen. Over the weekend, she'd finally uncovered the truth about Sunrise Properties, my company, and was threatening legal action, accusing me of covertly attempting a hostile takeover. I couldn't help but chuckle. So the mask had finally slipped. But Karen wasn't just angry, she was rattled. That same night, she went door to door, peddling rumors that I was turning our peaceful neighborhood into a parking lot for some imaginary luxury car collection. To my surprise, a few neighbors actually bought her story, especially when she waved around forged documents claiming I was linked to a shady developer. As we stepped out of the courthouse, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Text after text from neighbors came flooding in. Karen had just blasted out a mass email to the entire community, announcing her immediate resignation from the HOA board. According to her, she was being pushed out by powerful financial interests. Classic Karen, still playing the victim. I watched from a distance as she stormed toward her car, furiously typing on her phone like she was planning her next battle. I knew this wasn't her final act. She still had a handful of supporters in the neighborhood, and Karen was never the kind to bow out quietly. But for now, I had what mattered most. Concrete proof that the HOA president had abused her power for years, and the legal leverage to make lasting, meaningful change. The morning of our final court appearance began with an unexpected twist. Karen had sent a fleet of news vans to my front yard. She must have thought public scrutiny would intimidate me into backing off. Instead, she handed me a spotlight I was more than happy to stand in. I straightened my tie, grabbed the folders my accountant had prepared, and stepped outside with a smile. "Good morning," I said to the cluster of reporters. "I'm James Thompson. Let me show you something interesting about how our HOA's money has been managed." I held up a set of color-coded spreadsheets, each one tracking suspicious spending patterns, unexplainable fees, and renovations that mysteriously benefited only Karen's inner circle. The reporters leaned in, eyes widening, as I listed example after example. Karen charging single parents steeper penalties than her weekend golf buddies, turning a blind eye to her own infractions while writing up others for trivial offenses. Gasps echoed when I played footage of Karen sneaking into my yard at 3:00 a.m. to measure my lawn, while her own front yard looked like a jungle of violations. Inside the courtroom, Karen sat beside her overpriced attorney, adorned in her signature knockoff pearls and wearing a smug grin. That smile didn't last long. Our lawyer began laying out the evidence. Photos of Karen's home blatantly breaking HOA rules, an obnoxious purple mailbox, weeds waist-high, and her son's fleet of cars lining the street. Screenshots from a private Facebook group where Karen bragged about making life miserable for certain families. One post read, "Let's see how long the Thompsons last. Maybe they'll finally sell to someone more appropriate." Karen tried to object but froze as we played the recording from last week's neighborhood pool party. Her voice was crystal clear. "Of course I make up violations. How else do you expect us to control who lives here?" The judge didn't hesitate. His gavel struck hard as he ruled. Karen was officially removed from the HOA board and ordered to repay every unjustified fine. The total? $14,792. The stunned look on her face at that number? Priceless. With the board dissolved, I used my majority stake to rebuild it from the ground up, with real representation. We elected 5 new members from across the community, including Mrs. Rodriguez, who Karen once tried to fine for cooking ethnic food, Mr. Chen, whose lush garden Karen had mocked as being too exotic for the neighborhood. The transformation was swift. Kids were finally allowed to play basketball in their own driveways. Homeowners could grow vegetables, not just ornamental flowers. And families could own more than 2 vehicles, as long as they weren't blocking the street. 3 weeks later, I looked out my window just in time to see a moving truck pull up to Karen's house. She had sent one final message to the neighborhood, claiming she was relocating to a community with higher standards. Ironically, as she drove away, a bright yellow parking ticket was slapped under her windshield wiper from her new HOA. That evening, my daughter pulled into our driveway, parking right beside my work truck and Sarah's SUV. Nothing hidden, nothing to fear, just a normal family living freely again. I stepped outside and planted the new sign we'd all voted on as a community. "Welcome to Thompson Hills, where good neighbors build great neighborhoods." The next morning, I received an unexpected call. A television producer had caught wind of our story through the news. They wanted to create a documentary highlighting how we'd reclaimed our HOA and our dignity. As I looked out the window at kids laughing in the yards, neighbors chatting over fences, and driveways filled with life, I smiled to myself. Somewhere, Karen was probably watching from her new home, where the HOA only allowed one car in the driveway. Poetic justice. The cherry on top, property values in our neighborhood spiked 15% in the first month after Karen's exit. Turns out people do prefer living in a place built on mutual respect, not paranoia and power trips. A few of Karen's former allies even stopped by in the weeks that followed. One by one, they offered quiet apologies. They hadn't agreed with her, they explained. They were just afraid of becoming her next target. We still have an HOA, but now it works for the community, not against it. Our dues go toward things that matter: upgrading the playground equipment, finally fixing the broken pool, assisting elderly neighbors with home repairs. And the best part? We transformed the patch of land where Karen used to stage her yard violation photos into a thriving community garden. Tomatoes, basil, and sunflowers now grow where citations once flew. As I tucked away the last of the court documents into my filing cabinet, my phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number. Turns out it was Karen's new neighborhood watch group. They were reaching out, asking if I had any advice on how to deal with their HOA dictator. I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet laugh. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't about taking someone down. It's about showing others how to rise up. Karen thought she could rule with fear, fines, and a clipboard full of petty regulations. But she underestimated the power of community and what happens when good people stop being afraid. Want more HOA takedowns, community justice stories, and tips on reclaiming your neighborhood? Subscribe now and join a growing movement of homeowners fighting back. Smash that like button if you've ever dreamed of flipping the script on your HOA. Drop a comment with your worst HOA horror story. We might just feature yours next. Share this with a neighbor who's ready to push back against nonsense rules. Take control. Document everything. Yes, even those 3 a.m. lawn checks. Know your bylaws. They're more powerful than you think. Unite your neighbors. The true power is in people, not policy. Because your driveway, your garden, and your peace of mind, they're worth defending. Let's make every Karen wish she'd never picked up that clipboard. Drop A in the comments if your HOA hates your cars too.